morning sun was just rising over the Rocky Mountains of Afghanistan when Staff Sergeant Kim Tae-ho led his patrol through the narrow valley below. The air was cold and thin, making every breath visible in small white clouds. His team of 8 Marines moved carefully between the large stones and sand, watching for any signs of danger. Tae-ho had been in this country for 2 years now and knew how quickly things could go wrong in these mountains. One moment everything would be quiet and peaceful, then suddenly bullets would be flying from every direction. But today felt different somehow. The usual sounds of birds and insects were completely missing, making the silence feel heavy and strange. Through his radio headset, Tae-ho heard the voice of his commanding officer back at base telling him that satellite images showed nothing unusual in their patrol area. Everything looked normal from above, but something in his gut told him to stay alert. His Marine training had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now those instincts were screaming that danger was coming. Private Lee Jin-woo was walking point about 50 meters ahead of the main group when he suddenly stopped and raised his fist in the air. This was the signal for everyone to freeze and listen. Tae-ho moved up to join him and saw what had caught his attention. The sky above them was beginning to shimmer like heat waves rising from hot pavement, but it was too cold for that kind of effect. Then the impossible happened. The blue sky began to tear open like someone was cutting through fabric with invisible scissors. Behind the tear was nothing but darkness, filled with strange purple lights that pulsed like a heartbeat. The opening grew wider and wider until a massive shape began pushing through from the other side. The alien ship was unlike anything Tae-ho had ever seen or imagined. It was easily the size of a football stadium, but instead of being made of metal or concrete, it seemed to be constructed from some kind of crystal that bent and twisted light around itself. The hull was covered in patterns that hurt to look at directly, as if his human eyes were not designed to process what he was seeing before anyone in his squad could react. The ship moved with impossible speed from the sky down to just above their heads. Energy weapons that glowed bright blue began firing from hidden ports along the ship's bottom. The beams struck each Marine with perfect accuracy, sending them all crashing to the ground as their muscles stopped working and their vision went dark. Tae-ho fought against the stunning effect, trying to reach for his radio to call for backup, but his arms would not obey his commands. He could hear the sound of heavy footsteps approaching and managed to turn his head just enough to see tall reptilian creatures walking toward his paralyzed team. These beings stood at least 8 feet tall, with scales that shifted color from green to brown like chameleons. The aliens wore no clothing, but had devices attached to various parts of their bodies that glowed with the same blue light as their weapons. Their faces were long and narrow, with 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern and mouths full of sharp teeth. When they spoke to each other, their voices sounded like a mixture of hissing and clicking that made no sense to human ears. One of the creatures approached Tae-ho and looked down at him with what might have been curiosity. Its 4 eyes seemed to be scanning him from head to toe while it made notes on a device that appeared in its 3-fingered hand. The alien then spoke in perfect English, which was somehow more frightening than if it had remained silent. "You are the leader of this warrior group," the creature said in a voice that was too calm and measured for the situation. "Your species shows promise for our entertainment. We have been watching your conflicts and battles from orbit for many cycles now. The way you fight and refuse to surrender even when facing certain death is exactly what we need." Tae-ho tried to speak, but the stunning effect still held his voice frozen. The alien continued talking as if it was having a normal conversation instead of explaining why it had just attacked a military patrol. "You will come with us to serve in the grand arena, where beings from across the galaxy gather to watch combat between different species. Your performance will determine whether your planet deserves to continue existing or should be harvested for its resources." The other Marines were being loaded onto floating platforms that had emerged from the alien ship. Tae-ho could see that they were all still breathing, but remained completely paralyzed by whatever weapon had hit them. He watched helplessly as his men disappeared into the crystal ship, while the alien continued its explanation. "Your military records indicate significant combat experience in multiple war zones. This makes you valuable for our purposes. Most species we encounter surrender immediately when faced with superior force, But humans seem to possess an unusual willingness to fight, even when victory is impossible. This trait will provide excellent entertainment for our audiences and the alien finished speaking. Tae-ho felt himself being lifted by some kind of invisible force that carried him toward the ship. He tried one last time to break free, but his body still would not respond to his commands. The last thing he saw before entering the alien vessel was the empty valley where his patrol had been walking just minutes before. Inside the ship, the walls pulsed with soft light that seemed to come from the crystal itself, rather than any visible source Tae-ho was carried through. Corridors that curved and twisted in ways that made his head spin until he reached a transparent cell that sealed itself around him as soon as he was inside. As feeling slowly returned to his body, Tae-ho began to examine his prison. The cell was made of the same crystal material as the ship walls, but he could see through it clearly. On the other side of a large corridor were dozens of similar cells, each containing different types of alien beings. Some looked almost human, while others were so strange he could not begin to understand their biology. All of the prisoners shared the same expression of fear and confusion that Tae-ho felt in his own chest. But as he looked at each face, he began to notice something else. Many of these beings had the bearing and alertness of trained warriors even in captivity. They moved with purpose and kept their eyes constantly scanning for opportunities. A holographic display appeared in the air above the corridor, showing the image of an even larger alien creature. This one had golden scales covering its body and 4 muscular arms that ended in claws capable of crushing steel. When it spoke, its voice echoed through every cell with absolute authority. "Welcome to your new existence, primitive warriors. You have been selected to fight in the greatest arena in the known galaxy. Your deaths will provide entertainment for billions of civilized beings across hundreds of worlds. Those who fight well may earn quick deaths, while cowards will face much worse fates." The hologram continued explaining the rules and expectations, but Tae-ho was no longer listening. Instead, he was studying every detail of the ship around him, memorizing guard movements, counting weapons, and looking for weaknesses. The aliens had made their first mistake by keeping him alive long enough to observe and plan. His marine training was already taking over, analyzing the situation and developing strategies. These creatures thought they had captured just another primitive warrior, but they had no idea what a United States Marine was capable of when his back was against the wall. The transport ship carrying Tae-ho and the other prisoners emerged from hyperspace above a planet that looked like it had been built specifically for death and violence. Massive stadium structures covered the surface like metal scars, stretching from horizon to horizon. Each arena was easily large enough to hold millions of spectators, and they all pulsed with bright lights that could be seen even from orbit. Kalar Prime was the most famous arena world in the galaxy, where beings from thousands of different species came to watch combat between warriors captured from primitive planets. The entire economy of the world was based on blood sport and gambling, with fortunes won and lost on the outcomes of individual battles. As their ship descended toward the largest arena complex, Tae-ho could see holographic advertisements floating in the alien atmosphere. These massive displays showed highlights of previous matches, featuring creatures tearing each other apart, while excited crowds cheered for more violence. The ads promised even greater spectacles to come, including battles with newly captured Deathworld specimens. The landing was smooth and silent, but Tae-ho felt his stomach drop as the full reality of his situation became clear. Through the transparent walls of his cell, he could see hundreds of other transport ships arriving from different parts of the galaxy, each one carrying fresh prisoners for the arenas. The scale of this operation was far larger than he had imagined. When the doors opened, armed guards in powered armor herded the prisoners toward the arena complex. The guards were not the same reptilian species that had captured him, but appeared to be a mixture of different alien races all working together. Some looked like giant insects with multiple arms, while others resembled walking trees with bark-like skin. The holding cells beneath the main arena were a maze of suffering designed to break the spirit of anyone unfortunate enough to be imprisoned there. The walls were made of the same energy-conducting crystal as the ships, but these surfaces showed scenes of previous arena matches on constant loop. The message was clear that resistance was useless and death was inevitable. Tai-Ho was assigned to a cell block reserved for what the aliens called lesser species. These were beings from planets that had not yet developed interstellar travel and were considered primitive by galactic standards. Most of his fellow prisoners appeared to be warriors, of various kinds judging by their muscular builds and alert postures. In the cell next to his was another human, which surprised Tai-Ho greatly. The man appeared to be Asian and wore the remains of military clothing that looked familiar. When their eyes met, the stranger spoke quietly in Korean, asking if Tai-Ho could understand him. "My name is Kang Min-woo," the stranger said, keeping his voice low so the guards would not hear. "I was captured 3 months ago during a special operations mission. The aliens seem to find our language interesting, but I do not think they understand it yet." Tai-Ho moved closer to the barrier between their cells and responded in the same language, telling Min-woo his name and how he had been captured. Min-woo nodded grimly and began explaining what he had learned during his time in the arena complex. "The fights are not random," he whispered. "They study each prisoner carefully and match them against opponents designed to create the most entertaining battles possible. I have watched 47 matches since arriving here, and only one human has survived past the second round. They fed him to something called a void beast when the crowd grew bored. The arena master was a creature called General Vextar, who took personal interest in studying new arrivals." Min-woo explained that the general would visit the cells regularly, making detailed notes about each prisoner while planning future matches. His goal was to squeeze maximum entertainment value from each warrior before they inevitably died. If summoned by their conversation, General Vextar appeared in the corridor outside their cells, flanked by heavily armed guards. The creature was even more intimidating in person, standing nearly 10 feet tall with 8 eyes arranged around his head and arms that ended in razor-sharp claws. His scaled skin was covered in scars that told the story of countless battles. The general stopped directly in front of Tai-Ho's cell and began examining him with the clinical detachment of a scientist studying an interesting specimen. He made notes on a floating device while his multiple eyes tracked every movement and expression. "So you are the Marine," the general said in perfect English. "You're military. Records make for fascinating reading. Multiple combat deployments, excellent marksmanship scores, and commendations for bravery under fire. This will make for an entertaining introduction to our audiences." Tai-Ho remained silent and motionless, but his mind was racing as he memorized every detail of the general appearance and equipment. The creature wore no visible armor, but had several devices attached to his belt that probably served as both weapons and communication equipment. "Tomorrow, you will face 3 Karathian shock troopers simultaneously," General Vextar continued with what might have been amusement in his voice. "These warriors are cybernetically enhanced killing machines that have never lost a match in over 200 battles. The betting odds are quite amusing, with your survival chances calculated at less than 1%. The general made a few more notes, then moved on to examine other prisoners, but Tai-Ho had heard enough. He now knew what he would be facing and could begin preparing accordingly. The Karathians were obviously meant to be an overwhelming force designed to crush him quickly and brutally for the entertainment of the crowds at night, as strange constellations wheeled overhead through the small viewing portal in his cell. Tai-Ho began sharing his military knowledge with Min-woo and several other prisoners who had moved close enough to listen. He used hand signals and whispered explanations to teach them basic tactical concepts. Using dirt and small stones, he sketched out battlefield formations and explained how small units could defeat larger forces through superior positioning and coordination. Many of the aliens had never encountered organized military thinking and listened with growing interest as he described flanking maneuvers and coordinated attacks. One prisoner was a female warrior named Park Hae-jin, who had been captured during the defense of her home planet. She possessed natural fighting instincts but had never received formal military training. Tai-Ho showed her how to use an opponent's size and strength against them while conserving her own energy for critical moments. Another was Lee Dong-hyuk, a former engineer who had been taken during first contact with his species. He lacked combat experience but had an analytical mind that quickly grasped the mathematical principles behind military tactics. Tai-Ho realized that this man's knowledge of technology and systems could be invaluable. As the alien night progressed, more prisoners joined their informal training session. The guards seemed to view their gathering as natural social behavior and paid little attention to the actual content of their discussions. This oversight would prove to be a critical mistake. By the time the arena lights dimmed for the sleep cycle, Taeho had identified several potential allies and begun formulating the foundation of a resistance network. The aliens had assumed that keeping prisoners from different species together would prevent organized rebellion, but they had underestimated the universal appeal of hope. The seeds of something dangerous were being planted in the holding cells beneath Kalar Prime. Greatest Arena General Vextar and his subordinates had no idea that their newest prize was not just another primitive warrior, but a trained military leader who specialized in turning impossible situations into tactical advantages. Tomorrow would bring Taeho first test in the arena, but tonight, he was already planning far beyond simple survival. He was beginning to envision something that the Galactic Empire had never encountered before, a coordinated uprising led by warriors who refused to accept their fate. The arena floor stretched out like a circular battlefield, 200 meters across, surrounded by energy barriers that crackled with deadly electricity. The noise from the crowd was deafening, as hundreds of thousands of alien beings from dozens of different species filled every seat in the massive stadium. Their excited roars and calls for blood created a wall of sound that seemed to press down on everything below. Holographic displays floating above the arena showed detailed statistics about the upcoming match, including Taeho height-weight combat experience and, most prominently, a survival prediction of 0.3%. The crowd found this number hilarious, and their laughter echoed through the stadium like thunder. General Vextar's voice boomed from speakers positioned around the arena as he addressed the bloodthirsty audience. Citizens of the Galactic Empire, today we present a special entertainment. A primitive human warrior who believes his species possesses superior fighting ability. Watch as 3 of our finest Carathian shock troopers demonstrate the futility of lesser beings, as the gates on the opposite side of the arena began to open. Taeho felt his heart rate slow and his breathing become controlled. This was a familiar feeling from his deployments in Afghanistan, where staying calm under pressure often meant the difference between life and death. His Marine training was taking over, automatically shifting his mind into combat mode. The 3 Carathian warriors that emerged from the gates were unlike anything Taeho had ever faced in battle. Each one stood nearly 3 meters tall, with bodies that were a horrifying fusion of organic tissue and mechanical augmentation. Hydraulic pistons hissed and clicked with every movement, while their arms ended in retractable blade claws that could slice through armor plating. Their tactical gear was scarred from countless victories, and their glowing red optical implants tracked Taeho movements with machine precision. These were not just warriors, but living weapons designed specifically for killing in the arena. The crowd roar grew even louder as they recognized their favorite champions. But Taeho was not standing still, waiting for them to attack. The moment the combat signal sounded, he was already moving, using the arena's scattered obstacles and debris to break line of sight with his opponents. His years of urban combat experience had taught him that mobility and unpredictability were often more valuable than superior firepower. The Carathians had expected him to either charge forward in a desperate attack or cower in fear, waiting for death to claim him. Instead, their enhanced sensors lost track of him completely as he seemed to vanish into the arena landscape. This had never happened before in any of their previous matches. The first Carathian died before it even realized it was under attack. Taeho had climbed onto an overhead platform using skills learned in mountain warfare and waited for the perfect moment. When the creature passed directly below him, he dropped with all his weight behind a salvaged metal rod that he drove through a gap in the neck armor. The crowd's sudden silence was more shocking than their previous roar had been. They watched in disbelief as the massive cybernetic warrior toppled forward, spilling hydraulic fluid and sparks from severed cables. The impossible had just happened, and nobody knew how to react. The second Carathian was more cautious now that it understood the human was not behaving according to any known patterns. It activated additional sensors and moved more slowly, scanning every possible hiding place. But Taeho was already adapting to his opponent's capabilities when the creature blade claws finally found him. Taeho allowed himself to be wounded, taking deep gashes across his ribs, while positioning himself for a counterattack. He had noticed that the hydraulic systems in the alien's arms created a brief delay between commands and execution. Using this timing, he managed to redirect the creature's own momentum. The Carathian crashed into the arena wall with tremendous force, and before it could recover, Taeho had seized one of its blade claws and turned the weapon against its owner. The crowd was now completely silent as they watched their supposedly invincible champion fall to a primitive being that should have died in the first few seconds. The third Carathian, realizing it was now alone against an opponent that defied all tactical projections, activated its emergency protocols. The arena automated systems responded by deploying additional weapons and defensive equipment, while the creature called for backup support that had never been needed before. But Taeho was learning faster than the aliens could adapt. He had already figured out how to use pieces of the dead Carathians' technology and was turning their own advanced systems against them. Every move he made was calculated and precise, drawing on tactics developed through years of fighting enemies who possessed superior equipment. The final moments of the battle were a masterclass in human adaptability and tactical thinking, while the surviving Carathian relied on its programmed responses and technological advantages. Taeho used improvisation and creative problem-solving to stay one step ahead. When the last Carathian finally fell, the arena was so quiet that the sound of its body hitting the ground echoed clearly through the vast space. The crowd of hundreds of thousands remained frozen in shock, unable to process what they had just witnessed. Taeho stood in the center of the arena, surrounded by the bodies of three supposedly unbeatable warriors. His uniform was torn and bloody, but he remained upright and alert, scanning the crowd and barriers for any signs of additional threats. His Marine training had prepared him to fight until the last breath, and he was far from finished. General Vextar expression had changed completely from amused confidence to cold calculation. This human was not behaving according to any known biological or psychological patterns. The victory should have been impossible, yet the evidence lay scattered across the arena floor. The betting houses throughout the galaxy were in chaos as the few gamblers who had placed impossible odds on the human suddenly found themselves owed massive payouts. More importantly, military analysts from various alien factions were already requesting detailed combat footage to study this new tactical phenomenon. In the holding cells beneath the arena, the other prisoners watched through holographic feeds with growing amazement and hope. Many had already given up any chance of survival, but now they saw proof that even the most advanced alien warriors could be defeated through courage, intelligence, and determination. Minwoo pressed his face against his cell barrier and whispered to the other humans around him. He actually did it. That crazy Marine just showed the entire galaxy that we are not helpless victims. The implications of Taeho victory were spreading far beyond the arena as news networks across dozens of star systems began broadcasting footage of the impossible. Battle questions were being asked about human capabilities and potential that had never been considered before. For the first time since the Galactic Empire had begun its expansion into human space, there were beings throughout the galaxy who were beginning to wonder if these primitive Deathworlders might be far more dangerous than anyone had realized. General Vextar made detailed notes as he studied the combat footage. His initial assessment had been completely wrong, and now he needed to understand exactly what kind of threat this human represented. The arena had been designed to showcase alien superiority, but instead, it had just demonstrated something that could change the balance of power across the galaxy as medical teams tended to Taeho wounds and prepared him for transport back to his cell. The Marine was already planning his next moves. He had won the first battle, but the war was just beginning, and he intended to make sure that every alien who underestimated humanity would learn to regret that mistake. News of the human Marine victory spread through the galactic communication networks faster than anyone could have predicted. What should have been a routine execution had become the most watched arena match in over 50 years. Holographic recordings of the battle were being analyzed by military experts across hundreds of worlds, while betting establishments struggled to pay out massive winnings to the few gamblers who had been crazy enough to bet on impossible odds. The ripple effects reached far beyond simple entertainment value. Representatives from various alien military factions began submitting formal requests for detailed combat analysis, wanting to understand how a primitive being had defeated cybernetically enhanced warriors, using nothing but improvised tactics and determination. Some were already questioning whether their own forces would fare any better against these death-world humans. Tae-ho found himself moved from the standard prisoner cells to what the aliens called premium accommodations. This meant better food, medical treatment for his wounds, and access to basic training equipment. But he understood that this was simply preparation for an even more spectacular death. The arena masters needed to restore their reputation by presenting increasingly dangerous challenges until something finally managed to kill him. His new cell was larger and included a small exercise area where he could maintain his physical conditioning. More importantly, it was positioned where he could observe the daily routines of guards and staff members, giving him valuable intelligence about the facility security systems and operational procedures. The other human prisoners were also receiving better treatment as the aliens seemed to have developed a new respect for their species' capabilities. Minwoo was moved to an adjacent cell, where they could continue their tactical discussions while several other humans were transferred to the same block, creating an informal command structure. Through whispered conversations and carefully planned meetings, Tae-ho began expanding his network of contacts among the prisoner population. He discovered that many of the aliens held captive were accomplished warriors from their own worlds who possessed knowledge about advanced technology, weapon systems, and galactic politics that could prove invaluable. One of his most important contacts was Lee Dong-hyuk, the engineer who had been studying the arena power systems and security protocols during his captivity. Dong-hyuk had identified several potential weaknesses in the facility design, including backup power sources, emergency systems, and communication arrays that could be exploited. Another key ally was Park Hae-jin, the female warrior who had quickly mastered the tactical concepts Tae-ho had taught her. She possessed natural leadership abilities and had begun organizing the other prisoners into informal training groups where they shared combat techniques and survival strategies. The announcement of Tae-ho's next opponent came with tremendous fanfare, designed to restore confidence in alien superiority. War Chief Kim Soo-jin was introduced as the greatest individual combatant in the Keth Moran Empire, standing over 4 meters tall with 4 arms ending in natural bone spears and skin that could deflect most energy weapons. Soo-jin had fought in 17 arena matches and had never required more than 5 minutes to kill her opponents. Her species had evolved on a world where constant warfare was necessary for survival, and their entire culture was built around combat excellence. The betting odds were heavily in her favor, despite the growing respect for human capabilities. But during his preparation, Tae-ho had been far from idle. He had used his improved status to gain access to different areas of the facility where he could observe alien technology and tactical procedures. More importantly, he had been sharing his military knowledge with an ever-growing network of prisoners who were beginning to see possibilities beyond simple survival. Through a combination of stolen translator devices, hand signals, and carefully drawn diagrams, he had managed to communicate complex tactical concepts to beings from dozens of different species. Many of these prisoners were warriors from worlds that had been conquered by the Galactic Empire, and they possessed intimate knowledge of alien weaknesses and blind spots. The training sessions had evolved into something resembling a military academy, with different prisoners teaching specialized skills based on their backgrounds. Some possessed expertise in technology and engineering, while others understood alien psychology and social structures. Still others had experience with various types of weapons and combat systems. What was emerging in the holding cells beneath the arena was something the Galactic Empire had never encountered before. A coordinated resistance movement led by beings who refused to accept their fate and who were actively planning not just escape but revenge against their captors. When the day of his match against War Chief Soo-jin arrived, the atmosphere in the arena was charged with anticipation. The crowd was larger than usual and included high-ranking officials from various alien governments who wanted to witness firsthand whether the human victory had been mere luck or represented something more significant. The battle itself lasted 47 minutes, and became a tactical masterpiece that military academies across the galaxy would study for generations. Tai-Ho did not simply defeat Su-Jin. He systematically dismantled every advantage she possessed, while demonstrating combat principles that the watching aliens had never seen before. The fight revealed something that terrified the alien officials more than any simple victory could have. The human was not just winning through primitive savagery or desperate luck. He was learning, adapting, and evolving his tactics in real time while teaching others through his example. Every move he made was calculated and purposeful. When Su-Jin finally fell to her own bone spear turned against her by human ingenuity, the crowd reaction was very different. From his first victory, this time there was no shocked silence, but rather a growing murmur of concern and speculation among the alien spectators. General Vextar watched the footage repeatedly, trying to understand exactly what made this human so dangerous. The creature's tactical thinking was unlike anything in their databases, suggesting mental capabilities that far exceeded initial assessments. More disturbing was the way other prisoners responded to his victories with growing confidence and organization. In the holding cells, the atmosphere had changed completely from despair to something approaching hope. The other prisoners no longer saw themselves as helpless victims awaiting execution, but as potential warriors in a larger conflict. Many species that had been enemies on their home worlds were now working together under human leadership. Tai-Ho had done more than win 2 impossible battles. He had demonstrated that the Galactic Empire's greatest weakness was its arrogance and overconfidence. Their assumption that superior technology automatically meant superior fighting capability was being challenged by someone who understood that warfare was ultimately about will, intelligence, and adaptability. The implications were spreading throughout the galaxy as news networks analyzed every aspect of the matches. Military experts were beginning to ask uncomfortable questions about their own tactical doctrines and whether they would be effective against opponents who refused to follow predictable patterns. On planets throughout the Empire, enslaved populations were beginning to hear stories about the human warrior who had turned certain death into victory twice. The tales were growing with each retelling, but the core message remained the same: that resistance was possible, and that even the most advanced alien warriors could be defeated. General Vextar realized that the arena had accidentally created something far more dangerous than entertainment. They had given this human a platform to demonstrate capabilities that could inspire rebellions across the galaxy. Every victory made him more dangerous, not just as a fighter, but as a symbol of hope for the oppressed. The next phase of matches would need to be carefully planned to ensure that the human finally died in a way that would discourage, rather than inspire, other potential rebels. But as Tai-Ho returned to his cell surrounded by cheering prisoners from dozens of different species, it was becoming clear that killing him might no longer be enough to contain what he had started. The galaxy was about to learn that humans possess something that could not be defeated through superior technology or overwhelming force. They had an unbreakable refusal to surrender, and a talent for turning desperate situations into tactical advantages that would reshape the balance of power throughout known space. The arena security systems had been designed by the finest military engineers in the galaxy to contain individual prisoners, no matter how dangerous or resourceful they might be. However, these systems were never intended to deal with a coordinated, military-style rebellion organized by someone who understood both leadership and tactical warfare. Over the weeks following his victories against the Korathian shock troopers and War Chief Su-Jin, Tai-Ho had used every moment between matches to study the facility weaknesses and build an intelligence network among the prisoners. He had memorized guard rotation schedules, identified weapon storage locations, mapped escape routes, and most importantly, recruited allies from dozens of different species. The breakthrough came when Park Ji-sung, a computer programmer who had been captured during first contact protocols, managed to access the arena maintenance systems, using components carefully salvaged from destroyed combat drones and medical equipment. He had constructed a device capable of temporarily disrupting the energy barriers that held them prisoner. "We will have exactly 9 minutes and 37 seconds before backup systems activate," Ji-sung whispered during a clandestine meeting in the exercise yard. "After that, every security drone patrol unit and automated defense system in the complex will be hunting us with kill orders." Tai-Ho had spent those weeks preparing for exactly this moment. He had established communication with sympathetic prisoners and other cell blocks, identified key personnel among the facility staff, and developed detailed plans for seizing control of critical systems. The uprising would not simply be an escape attempt, but a full military operation designed to capture the entire arena complex. The plan required precise timing and coordination between groups that had never worked together before. Warriors from dozens of different worlds would need to follow human tactical doctrine while using their own unique abilities and knowledge. The success of the entire operation depended on their ability to trust each other and follow orders even in the chaos of combat. Lee Dong-hyuk had been studying the facility power distribution systems and had identified the main reactor control room as the key to disabling security measures. Once they gained access to that area, they could shut down communications, prevent reinforcements, and trap the alien guards in their own facility. Park Hee-jin had been organizing combat teams among the prisoners, teaching them basic military formations and coordination techniques. Her natural leadership abilities and fierce determination had earned respect from beings who had initially been skeptical about following human commands. The uprising began during what was scheduled to be Taeho's final match against something called a nightmare beast. The creature had been genetically engineered specifically for arena combat and had never been defeated by any opponent. It stood over 6 meters tall with multiple rows of razor-sharp teeth, acid-filled sacs along its spine, and claws capable of shredding starship hull plating. As the beast was released into the arena, the lights suddenly went out throughout. The entire complex emergency power systems activated, bathing everything in red light, while alarm sirens began wailing across the facility. The force barriers flickered and died as Ji-sung device sent electromagnetic pulses through the power grid. From their cells, hundreds of prisoners could hear the distinctive sounds of human voices coordinating military maneuvers, echoing through the corridors. Explosions and energy weapon discharges mixed with shouts of tactical commands as the carefully planned operation unfolded with precision timing. What the alien guards discovered was that they had made a critical error in their assumptions about primitive species. They had believed that superior technology would always triumph over determination. But Marines are trained to fight with whatever weapons they can find, and the arena complex was filled with improvised weapons and tactical opportunities. Taeho did not simply escape from his match with the nightmare beast. Instead, he turned the Yao creature against its handlers, using the arena own systems to redirect its rage toward the control booth where General Vextar and his staff were watching in growing horror as their perfect security system collapsed around them. The liberated prisoners moved through the facility like a coordinated army, rather than a mob of desperate fugitives. Each group had specific objectives and followed predetermined routes, while maintaining communication through salvaged equipment. Teams secured weapon storage, areas disabled communication systems, and captured key personnel with military efficiency. Minwoo led one assault team in seizing the main armory, where they discovered weapons and equipment from dozens of different worlds. Many of these items had been taken from previous prisoners, and their original owners were eager to reclaim them, along with the chance for revenge against their captors. Dong-hyuk successfully reached the reactor control room, where he began systematically shutting down security systems and opening additional cell blocks. Throughout the complex, more prisoners were joining the rebellion as word spread that escape was not only possible but actually happening. Hee-jin coordinated the defense of strategic positions as alien reinforcements attempted to retake control of the facility. Her tactical innovations combined human military doctrine with alien technology in ways that confused and overwhelmed the guards who had never encountered such adaptive thinking. The turning point came when Taeho and his core team managed to capture the main communication center. This gave them access to the planetary defense network and allowed them to broadcast their message to other arena facilities across Kalar Prime. The rebellion was spreading beyond a single complex to encompass the entire world, as alien military units attempted to respond to the crisis they found themselves facing. Opponents who fought with a combination of desperation, intelligence, and tactical sophistication that their training had never prepared them for. The humans had not only escaped, but had somehow convinced thousands of other prisoners to follow their lead. The battle for the arena complex lasted 18 hours and ended with complete victory for the rebellion. Every alien guard and administrator was either captured or had fled the facility, leaving behind a treasure trove of advanced technology weapons and intelligence about galactic military capabilities standing in the ruins of General Vextar Command Center, surrounded by liberated prisoners from dozens of worlds. Taiho looked up at the communication arrays that could broadcast to every corner of known space. The real battle was just beginning, and it was time to send a message that would change everything. The galaxy had created these arenas to demonstrate the superiority of advanced civilizations over primitive species, but instead, they had accidentally provided the perfect training ground for warriors who specialized in turning impossible situations into tactical victories. What had started as entertainment for bored alien civilians was about to become the spark that ignited rebellions on every world where beings were held in slavery. The Empire had made the mistake of teaching humans about their technology, their weaknesses, and their fears. Now it was time for the galaxy to learn what happened when Marines decided that surrender was not an option, and that every creature deserved the chance to fight for freedom. The uprising had succeeded beyond all expectations, but the war for liberation was just getting started. The prisoners who had been scheduled for execution were now an army, and they had work to do across the stars. There were millions of enslaved beings waiting for someone to show them that resistance was possible, and that even the most advanced alien technology could be defeated by courage, intelligence, and the refusal to accept defeat.